Hi, this is your English teacher, Lindsay from Fluent TOEFL. This is a full listening course on the listening section of the TOEFL IBT. You're going to practice listening to one conversation and 4 lectures. And not only am I going to give you the answers, but I'm going to give you answer explanations and a study guide with each transcript of each conversation and lecture. So get some pieces of paper and a pen or pencil ready to go and get ready to prepare for the listening section of the TOEFL IBT. First of all, follow along with the study guide pinned in the comments. There are a lot of resources there for you, including transcripts of every single conversation and lecture. First, we're going to go over the question types. If you are already familiar with this, you can skip ahead to how to take notes. If you need this practice, then pause the video and in the study guide, fill in the blanks for each question type. The underlined part in each will help you guess what question type it is. Okay, let's see how you did. The first one is the detail question or the factual information question. This is the same type of question that you see in the reading section. They ask you for a detail or a fact. You'll see in the practice today that they won't ask you for easy details, like the year something happened or the name of a philosopher. They'll ask for more complex details that fit the main idea. For example, in the conversation you'll hear today, the student has a problem or a concern. So the details often involve the solution to that problem or the teacher addressing his concern. Number 2 is the main idea. It's important to understand that they will always ask you the main idea of the conversation and lecture. They will ask you the main idea for both. It might be the first or second question after the audio, but they will always ask you the main idea. So you need to understand the main idea. That's something we're going to practice today, both in the conversation and in the lectures. Number 3 is inference. Just like detail, this is a similar question type to the reading section of the TOEFL. They are asking you to make an inference. Do you know what that means, to make an inference? When something is inferred, it is not explicitly stated. It is suggested. So when you make an inference, you understand meaning that is suggested, not explicitly stated. Number 4 is organization. This is usually just in the lectures, and it's similar to number 7, which is categorizing. You're putting ideas from the audio into categories based on their similarities and differences. Number 5 is attitude, understanding the speaker's attitude or opinion. Number 6 is function, understanding the reason a specific thing is said, the function of a phrase or a sentence. If you've practiced the TOEFL listening before, you probably can recognize these right away. These function questions are when you listen again to a small part of the lecture or conversation, and then they usually ask something like, why did the professor say this? Or what did the student mean when they said this? And again, the last one is categorizing. How to take notes. Again, if you're already confident in your approach to taking notes, you can skip ahead to the next section, which is tips. But if you want to do this practice in the study guide, pause the video and mark these statements as true or false. Okay, we're going to go through your answers here. Number 1 is false. Your notes should have complete sentences that are grammatically correct. No, absolutely not. They do not need to be grammatically correct. I always say this in my videos and lessons. Messy notes are good notes, as long as you can understand them. That's the important thing. When a speaker in a conversation or a lecture mentions their opinion, it is a good idea to include it in your notes. This is true. These are common detail questions in the listening section that ask about the speaker's attitude or opinion. There are also specific attitude and opinion questions asking about the speaker's attitude or opinion. Number 3 is true. Your notes should always capture the main idea. They will always ask you what the main idea is of the conversation, what is the main idea of the lecture. Your notes might not say it exactly word for word, but they should capture the main idea. Number 4 is false. It's impossible for your notes to help you answer main idea questions. No, it is possible for them to help you. Like I just said, they don't have to have the main idea word for word, but they should capture the main idea. They should help you understand the main idea. Number 5 is true. You should use symbols and shorthand in your notes. Shorthand is writing words in an abbreviated style so that you can write faster. I'll show you some symbols that you might want to use in your notes in just a little bit. Number 6, your notes need every single detail in order to be useful. This is false. I have watched many students take notes while practicing for the listening section, and I've noticed that the students who write constantly usually don't do as well as those who listen, pause to write, then listen again, then pause to write, then listen again. So you have to listen and understand, then write that down, and then listen and understand, and then write that down. You do not need to write every single thing you hear. Number 7, true. Draw a line in the middle of notes for conversations. And number 8 is true. You don't need to do that same thing for lectures. Sometimes a student will ask a question, or several students will ask questions during the lecture, but the line down the middle is just not necessary. The lecture is always focused on the professor who is speaking. Number 9 is false. Like I said before about number 6, you do not need to write every single detail. So you don't need to write the whole time. You need to be able to listen and understand, then write, and then listen and understand, and then write. Your notes should reflect the organization of the lecture. This is true. Try to keep them in chronological order, especially for a lecture. The top of the page should be the very first thing that they say, and the last thing at the bottom of the page should be the last thing they say. Here are some abbreviations you could use that I often use: SS for students, PPL for people, and so forth. These are some common ones, but again, whatever makes sense to you is the most important thing. The notes are for you. Okay, here are some important tips. Take notes, of course, and use them. I've been teaching TOEFL for a long time, and I always get some students who think that they don't need to take notes in the listening section. I completely disagree. Even if you have a strong command of English, you still need to take notes. I need to take notes when I'm doing these listening exercises, even though I'm a native speaker, because they do ask for big picture details that might slip your mind if you're not actively taking notes. And then use your notes. A lot of students take good notes, but they don't really look at them when they're answering the questions. So refresh your memory while answering the questions by using your notes. Predict your answers before looking at the answer choices. I said this in my full reading course video, and I say it for every multiple choice test. You should always predict your answers before looking at the answer choices, because if it's multiple choice and there's one correct answer out of 4, that means that 75% of that information is wrong. So before you are influenced by these wrong answers, you need to think about what you believe is the right answer. Think for yourself before looking at the answer choices, especially with the main idea. Which leads us to the next tip. Try to paraphrase the main idea in your head right after the audio finishes. I want you to get into the habit of doing it consistently, because they always ask you the main idea for both conversations and for lectures. Pay attention to tone, emotion, and opinions. This can help with several types of questions, such as detail questions, attitude questions, and function questions. Pay attention to details that relate to the main idea. For example, in the conversation today, the student has a concern about his research paper. He doesn't know what to include in the research paper. So when the professor answers this question and says what he should and shouldn't include, that's a detail that you need to know. It needs to be in your notes, and they will ask you about it as one of the questions. Not all of the details will fit neatly into the main idea, but most of the time they will. As long as you understand the main idea, you will know what kinds of details they're going to ask about. Note that questions usually follow the same chronological order of the conversation or lecture. So usually question 1 and question 2 right after the audio are coming from closer to the beginning of that audio. And then question 5 or 6 after the audio are usually coming from the end of the audio. Which relates to the last tip, which is to keep listening. Sometimes the last sentence of the audio is vital. Sometimes the last sentence of the conversation or lecture will be the last question. Many students miss that one because they get exhausted from actively listening for so long, and stop paying attention to the last few sentences. Okay, you're going to practice. It's important that you take notes. After you finish listening, you're going to answer each question, and then we're going to compare our notes, and I'm going to explain each answer to you. Drill number 1 is a conversation, so have your notes ready to go and have that line down the middle.
Hi, Professor Thompson. I know your office hours are tomorrow, but I was wondering if you had a few minutes free now to discuss something.
Sure, John. What did you want to talk about?
Well, I have some quick questions about how to write up the research project I did this semester about climate variations.
Oh, yes. You were looking at variations in climate in the Grand City area, right? How much progress have you made?
I've got all my data, so I'm starting to summarize it now, preparing graphs and stuff. But I'm looking at it, and I'm afraid that it's not enough, but I'm not sure what else to put in the report.
I hear the same thing from every student. You have to remember now that you're the expert on what you've done. So think about what you'd need to include if you were going to explain your research project to someone with general or casual knowledge about the subject, like your parents. That's usually my rule of thumb. Would my parents understand this?
Okay, that makes sense.
I hope you can recognize by my saying that how much you do know about the subject.
Right. I understand. I was wondering if I should also include the notes from the research journal you suggested I keep.
Yes, definitely. You should use them to indicate what your evolution in thought was through time. So just set up, what was the purpose of what you were doing, to try to understand the climate variability of this area, and what you did, and what your approach was.
Okay. So, for example, I studied meteorological records. I looked at climate charts. I used different methods for analyzing the data, like certain statistical tests, and then I discussed the results. Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's right. You should include all of that. The statistical tests are especially important. And also be sure you include a good reference section where all your published and unpublished data came from, because you have a lot of unpublished climate data.
Something just came into my mind and went out the other side.
That happens to me a lot, so I've come up with a pretty good memory management tool. I carry a little pad with me all the time and jot down questions or ideas that I don't want to forget. For example, I went to the doctor with my daughter and her baby son last week, and we knew we wouldn't remember everything we wanted to ask the doctor, so we actually made a list of 5 things we wanted answers to.
A notepad is a good idea. Since I'm so busy now at the end of the semester, I'm getting pretty forgetful these days. I just remembered what I was trying to say before.
Good. I was hoping you'd come up with it.
Yes. It ends up that I have data on more than just the immediate Grant City area, so I also included some regional data in the report. With everything else, it should be a pretty good indicator of the climate in this part of the state.
Sounds good. I'd be happy to look over a draft version before you hand in the final copy, if you wish.
Great. I'll plan to get you a draft of the paper by next Friday. Thanks very much. Well, see ya.
I hear the same thing from every student. You have to remember now that you're the expert on what you've done. So think about what you'd need to include if you were going to explain your research project to someone with general or casual knowledge about the subject, like your parents. That's usually my rule of thumb. Would my parents understand this?
Okay, that makes sense.
I hope you can recognize by my saying that how much you do know about the subject.
Okay, let's compare notes. Here's a picture of my notes on this conversation. You can see that I drew a line down the middle because it's a conversation. It's always a conversation between a man and a woman so that you can hear the difference in their voices. This one is between a student and a professor. I have the student, the man, on the left, and the professor, the woman, on the right. Everything is still in chronological order, so her response to what he said about the research project is on the same line. He says something about the research project, and she said, oh yes, climate variations. Let's talk about the general structure of these notes. You can see that I'm using check marks as a symbol that helps me take notes faster. Even the second to last thing that I wrote on the right, where it says, sounds good, that could have been simply a smiley face. She was agreeing to look at the draft for him. A smiley face will be sufficient in reminding me that. Okay, we'll come back to the notes as we go through the answers. Number 1, did you remember to predict the main idea? Why does the man go to see the professor? To talk about a report he is writing. He clearly says it near the beginning, and you can check the transcript. It's mentioned at the beginning and it's mentioned throughout. Number 2 is a function question. You get to listen again to part of the conversation, and then you're answering why the professor says this. I've been teaching these listening drills for a long time, and people often miss this question. But if you listen carefully, you can actually hear the positivity in her voice. She has a very positive tone. And if you eliminate all the answer choices that are not positive, you are only left with choice B, which is correct. She is offering him encouragement. Another tip for function questions is to think about where they come from in the entire conversation or lecture. This one came near the beginning. If we go back to the notes, we can see that it came near the beginning when she says, you are the expert. You can see in the notes he's asking about what to include because he's feeling insecure. And she answers that question by saying, you're the expert. Then in the part that you listen to again, she says, I hope you know by my saying that how much you do know about the subject. She emphasizes the word do because she's offering him encouragement that he knows a lot. Number 3, this is a category question. This is quite challenging because he lists these things quickly in the conversation. You can see in the notes, he asked about meteorological records, climate charts, statistical tests, and results, and she answered, yes, you should include all of that. And I wrote checkmark all from her answer, and for him on the left, I don't have time to spell out meteorological records, so I wrote METREC. That will help me remember meteorological records. And same thing with climate charts, statistical tests, and results. I'm using shorthand so that I can write as quickly as possible. And the interviews with meteorologists is the only thing not included. This one's kind of a trick option because they mention the meteorological records, but they do not mention interviews with meteorologists. Number 4 is to demonstrate a way of remembering things because it's asking you why. It's a little bit like a function question, but it still comes from my notes when she talked about the doctor. If you're wondering why she's talking about a doctor, you want to know the reason, right? It doesn't quite fit the main idea. This is not about the research paper anymore. Well, she's talking about the doctor as a way of remembering things. Lastly, what does the professor offer to do for the man? She offers to review the first version of his report. This is what I was saying earlier, that sometimes they will ask you a question about the very last few sentences of the audio. So if you don't keep paying attention, you might miss an important last detail. In the study guide, there's a transcript of this conversation between the student and the professor. There's a transcript for each audio today. So you can pause the video and underline the details that answer numbers 3 and 5, and the details that support the answers for number 1, 2, and 4. This is a really valuable way for you to improve on the listening section by using transcripts. Now you're going to listen to a lecture from a philosophy class. You're going to listen to the lecture and then answer the questions. Then we are going to compare notes and go over the answers together.
Another ancient Greek philosopher we need to discuss is Aristotle. Aristotle's ethical theory. What Aristotle's ethical theory is all about is this. He's trying to show you how to be happy. He's trying to show you what true happiness is. Now, why is he interested in human happiness? It's not just because it's something that all people want or aim for. It's more than that. But to get there, we need to first make a very important distinction. Let me introduce a couple of technical terms: extrinsic value and intrinsic value. To understand Aristotle's interest in happiness, you need to understand this distinction. Some things we aim for and value, not for themselves, but for what they bring about in addition to themselves. If I value something as a means to something else, then it has what we will call extrinsic value. Other things we desire and hold to be valuable for themselves alone. If we value something not as a means to something else, but for its own sake, let us say that it has intrinsic value. Exercise. There may be some people who value exercise for itself, but I don't. I value exercise because if I exercise, I tend to stay healthier than I would if I didn't. So I desire to engage in exercise, and I value exercise extrinsically, not for its own sake, but as a means to something beyond it. It brings me good health. And health. Why do I value good health? Well, here it gets a little more complicated for me. Health is important for me because I can't do other things I want to do. Play music, teach philosophy if I'm ill. So health is important to me, has value to me, as a means to a productive life. But health is also important to me because I just kind of like to be healthy. It feels good. It's pleasant to be healthy, unpleasant not to be. So, to some degree, I value health both for itself and as a means to something else, productivity. It's got extrinsic and intrinsic value for me. Then there's some things that are just valued for themselves. I'm a musician, not a professional musician. I just play a musical instrument for fun. Why do I value playing music? Well, like most amateur musicians, I only play because, well, I just enjoy it. It's something that's an end in itself. Now, something else I value is teaching. Why? Well, it brings in a modest income, but I could make more money doing other things. I'd do it even if they didn't pay me. I just enjoy teaching. In that sense, it's an end to itself. But teaching's not something that has intrinsic value for all people, and that's true generally. Most things that are enjoyed in and of themselves vary from person to person. Some people value teaching intrinsically, but others don't. So, how does all this relate to human happiness? Well, Aristotle asks, is there something that all human beings value? And value only intrinsically, for its own sake, and only for its own sake? If you could find such a thing, that would be the universal final good, or truly the ultimate purpose or goal for all human beings. Aristotle thought the answer was yes. What is it? Happiness. Everyone will agree, he argues, that happiness is the ultimate end to be valued for itself, and really only for itself. For what other purpose is there in being happy? What does it yield? The attainment of happiness becomes the ultimate or highest good for Aristotle. The next question that Aristotle raises is, what is happiness? We all want it, we all desire it, we all seek it. It's the goal we have in life. But what is it? How do we find it? Here he notes with some frustration, people disagree. But he does give us a couple of criteria, or features to keep in mind as we look for what true human happiness is. True human happiness should be, as he puts it, complete. Complete in that it's all we require. Well, true human happiness. If you had that, what else do you need? Nothing. And second, true happiness should be something that I can obtain on my own. I shouldn't have to rely on other people for it. Many people value fame and seek fame. Fame for them becomes the goal. But according to Aristotle, this won't work either, because fame depends altogether too much on other people. I can't get it on my own, without help from other people. In the end, Aristotle says that true happiness is the exercise of reason, a life of intellectual contemplation, of thinking. So let's see how he comes to that. Now, something else I value is teaching. Why? Well, it brings in a modest income, but I could make more money doing other things.
Okay, how did it go? Let's compare notes. Here are my notes from the lecture. Remember before when I was talking about how to take notes, that the organization of the lecture should be reflected in your notes? This is an example of that. Very early on, the professor says that the lecture is about happiness and that she wants to introduce a couple of important words: extrinsic and intrinsic. Then she starts comparing those two things. So in my notes, I have two categories, one for extrinsic and one for intrinsic. I simply wrote EX for extrinsic and IN for intrinsic. So this is an example of your notes being organized in the same way that the lecture is organized. It can really help you answer all types of questions on the listening section to do this. And again, I'm using symbols and shorthand so that I can take notes quickly, but you can see it's not even a full page. This is a small notebook. I don't need to write the whole time to get the important details. Students are always asking me, how do I know which details are important and which ones aren't? Like I said before, they should fit the main idea. Usually they do. But also practice. Do this whole course. And then do my listening test video. And you'll get familiar with the types of questions that the TOEFL will ask you. Did you remember to predict the main idea? The main idea is D, to discuss Aristotle's view about human happiness. Number 2, this one is quite challenging, but if you have your notes organized in a similar way to how the lecture is organized, then this one will be a little bit easier for you. You can see in my notes, again, that I have a category for extrinsic and one for intrinsic. So I put her examples in those categories in my notes. Health is in both categories. Exercise is extrinsic for her. And for intrinsic, playing a musical instrument and teaching. Number 3, why is happiness central to Aristotle's theory? B, because it is valued for its own sake by all people. This is a detailed question. Once we finish up with the answers, please pause the video and use the transcript to find these details. It will really help you advance in your listening skills to do this kind of review. Number 4 is A, fame cannot be obtained without help from other people. Again, this is a detailed question. After number 5, I want you to pause the video and look at the transcript. Lastly, for this lecture, number 5, this is a function question again. What does the professor mean when she says, I could make more money doing other things? She means that the reason she is a teacher has little to do with her salary. Now, I've had students miss this question in the past because of a misunderstanding with grammar. She says, and you can see this in the transcript, I could make more money doing other things. But there's a difference between I could make more money and I might make more money. So in choice B, I may or might make more money is very different than I could make more money. Could is about her ability. She could if she wanted to, but she doesn't want to because she really just loves teaching. Remember, before we move on, you can pause the video, review your answers by reading the transcript of that lecture from the philosophy class, and find support for the detailed answers and every other type of question as well, even the main idea. Now we will move on to drill number 3. You're going to listen to a lecture from a psychology class. You're going to take notes, answer the questions, and then we will review your answers together.
Many people consider John Watson to be the founder of behaviorism, and like other behaviorists, he believed that psychologists should study only the behaviors they can observe and measure. They're not interested in mental processes. While a person could describe his thoughts, no one else can see or hear to verify the accuracy of his report. But one thing you can observe is muscular habits. What Watson did was to observe muscular habits because he viewed them as a manifestation of thinking. One kind of habit that he studied are laryngeal habits. Watson thought laryngeal habits, from larynx, in other words related to the voice box, were an expression of thinking. He argued that for very young children, thinking is really talking out loud to oneself because they talk out loud, even if they're not trying to communicate with someone in particular. As the individual matures, that overt talking to oneself becomes covert talking to oneself, but thinking still shows up as a laryngeal habit. One of the bits of evidence that supports this is that when people are trying to solve a problem, they typically have increased muscular activity in the throat region. That is, if you put electrodes on the throat and measure muscle potential, muscle activity, you discover that when people are thinking, like if they're diligently trying to solve a problem, there is muscular activity in the throat region. So Watson made the argument that problem-solving, or thinking, can be defined as a set of behaviors, a set of responses. And in this case, the response he observed was the throat activity. That's what he means when he calls it a laryngeal habit. Now, as I'm thinking about what I'm going to be saying, my muscles in my throat are responding. So thinking can be measured as muscle activity. Now, the motor theory? Yes.
Excuse me, Professor Blake, did he happen to look at people who sign, deaf people?
He did indeed. And to jump ahead, what one finds in deaf individuals who use sign language is that when they're given problems of various kinds, they have muscular changes in their hands when they're trying to solve a problem. Muscle changes in the hand are just like the muscular changes going on in the throat region for speaking individuals. So for Watson, thinking is identical with the activity of muscles. A related concept of thinking was developed by William James and is called ideomotor action. Ideomotor action is an activity that occurs without our noticing it, without our being aware of it. I'll give you one simple example. If you think of locations, there tends to be eye movement that occurs with your thinking about that location. In particular, from where we're sitting, imagine that you're asked to think of our university library. Well, if you close your eyes and think of the library, and if you're sitting directly facing me, then according to this notion, your eyeballs will move slightly to the left, to your left, because the library's in that general direction. James and others said that this is an idea leading to a motor action, and that's why it's called ideomotor action. An idea leads to motor activity. If you wish to impress your friends and relatives, you can change this simple process into a magic trick. Ask people to do something such as I've just described. Think of something on their left. Think of something on their right. You get them to think about two things on either side with their eyes closed, and you watch their eyes very carefully. And if you do that, you'll discover that you can see rather clearly the eye movement. That is, you can see the movement of the eyeballs. Now then you say, think of either one, and I'll tell you which you're thinking of. Okay, well, Watson makes the assumption that muscular activity is equivalent to thinking. But given everything we've been talking about here, one has to ask, are there alternatives to this motor theory, this claim that muscular activities are equivalent to thinking? Is there anything else that might account for this change in muscular activity, other than saying that it is thinking? And the answer is clearly yes. Is there any way to answer the question definitively? I think the answer is no. Watson thought laryngeal habits, from larynx, in other words related to the voice box,
Okay, let's go over your answers. Did you remember to predict the main idea? I hope you did. What did you think the main idea is? Let's see if you're right. Number 1 is C, a theory about the relationship between muscle activity and thinking. Number 2, this is a function question. It is B, to explain the meaning of a term. A lot of students miss this one. The professor says it so quickly and casually that a lot of students miss that he is relating the meaning of the word to its Latin roots. So he's talking about the meaning of the word. Number 3, the muscles in their hands move when they solve problems. The student asked if they had studied this topic in deaf people, and the answer was that they have, and that their hands move when they solve problems. Number 4, students' eyes will turn toward it if they think about it. So C is the answer to number 4. This whole lecture and these questions are a really good example of how the details fit the main idea. This is a lecture about muscle activity in relation to thinking. And these details support that main idea. Your eye movement is related to you thinking about it. That was the purpose of mentioning the university library. Number 5 is A, an action people make that they are not aware of. Again, this really fits the main idea. When you hear this and how it supports the main idea, you want to get that down in your notes, that he's talking about a magic trick. And why is he talking about a magic trick? Because it shows an action that people make that they are not aware of. Lastly, what is the professor's opinion? It is D. It cannot be completely proved or disproved. This is an example of why you need to keep listening all the way through to the end, because this is something he says in the last 2 sentences. You can see in the transcript in your study guide, he says, is there anything else that might account for this change in muscular activity? And I think the answer is clearly yes. Is there any way to answer the question definitively? I think the answer is no. So even just hearing that yes and no at the end can help you answer this question. Okay, before we move on, remember that you can pause the video now and review your answers from the last lecture by looking at the transcript in the study guide. The study guide is pinned in the comments. Drill number 4, listen to a lecture from an astronomy class. You do not need to remember the numbers the professor mentions. You just need to know why the numbers are being discussed, but you do not need to remember the numbers themselves.
Okay, let's get going. Today, I'm going to talk about how the asteroid belt was discovered, and I'm going to start by writing some numbers on the board. Here they are. We'll start with 0, then 3, 6, 12. Tell me what I'm doing.
Multiplying by 2?
Right. I'm doubling the numbers. So 2 times 12 is 24, and the next one I'm going to write after 24 would be
48.
48. Then 96. We'll stop there for now. Now, I'll write another row of numbers under that. Tell me what I'm doing. 4, 7, 10. How am I getting the second row?
Adding 4 to the numbers in the first row.
I'm adding 4 to each number in the first row to give you a second row. So the last 2 will be 52, 100. And now tell me what I'm doing.
Putting in a decimal?
Yes, I divided all those numbers by 10 by putting in a decimal point. Now, I'm going to write the names of the planets under the numbers: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. So, what do the numbers mean? Do you remember from the reading?
Is it the distance of the planets from the sun?
Right, in astronomical units. Not perfect, but tantalizingly close. The value for Mars is off by 6 or 7% or so, but it's within 10% of the average distance to Mars from the sun. But I kind of have to skip the one after Mars for now. Then, Jupiter is right there at 5 point something, and then Saturn is about 10 astronomical units from the sun. Well, this pattern is known as Bode's law. It isn't really a scientific law, not in the sense of predicting gravitation mathematically or something, but it's attempting a pattern in the spacing of the planets, and it was noticed by Bode hundreds of years ago. Well, you can imagine that there was some interest in why the 2.8 spot in the pattern was skipped, but there wasn't anything obvious there in the early telescopes. Then what happened in the late 1700s? The discovery of another planet, the next planet out, Uranus, after Saturn. And look, Uranus fits in the next spot in the pattern pretty nicely. Not perfectly, but close. And so then, people got really excited about the validity of this thing and finding the missing object between Mars and Jupiter. Telescopes, remember, were getting better. So people went to work on finding objects that would be at that missing distance from the Sun. And then, in 1801, the object Ceres was discovered, and Ceres was in the right place. The missing spot, but it was way too faint to be a planet. It looked like a little star, and because of its star-like appearance, it was called an asteroid. Okay, aster is Greek for star, as in astronomy. And so, Ceres was the first and is the largest of what became many objects discovered at that same distance. Not just one thing, but all the objects found at that distance form the asteroid belt. So the asteroid belt is the most famous success of this Bode's law. That's how the asteroid belt was discovered. Well, this pattern is known as Bode's law. It isn't really a scientific law, not in the sense of predicting gravitation mathematically or something.
Let's go over the answers. I hope that you are predicting, I hope that you are taking notes, and I hope that you are synthesizing the main idea as quickly as possible. Number 1, what is Bode's law? D, a pattern in the spacing of the planets. The student asked this and he confirmed that that is what Bode's law is. You can see this in the transcript. Number 2 is B, to explain how the asteroid belt was discovered. I find that students often struggle with this listening drill. I think it's partly because it's in a science class, an astronomy class, but it's really more of a story. The professor is giving us the history of how the asteroid belt was discovered. It's one of the first things he says in the lecture, that this is what the class will be about. And then he tells the story. So if you can track the story of this lecture, that will help you more than the scientific details or the math of the lecture. How does the professor introduce Bode's law? A, by demonstrating how it is derived mathematically. Like I said before, you don't need to know the numbers, but you do need to know why the numbers are being discussed. And they are being discussed because it shows how Bode's law was derived mathematically. Number 4 is D, to contrast Bode's law with a real scientific law. The professor says something like, not in the sense of predicting gravity mathematically. He is comparing the limits of Bode's law with a real scientific law. Bode's law is less accurate than gravity, still useful, but less accurate. And he's making that point. Number 5, be sure that you have selected 2 answers like it says in the instructions. It is A and D. These are both details. You can see them in the transcript. Remember that you can pause the video and look through the transcript. It's really good for review, especially with a challenging lecture such as this one. Listen to part of a lecture from a botany class. This is the last one. As usual, you're going to listen to the lecture, you're going to answer the questions, and then we're going to review the answers together.
Good to see you all today. Actually, I expected the population to be a lot lower today. It typically runs between 50 and 60% on the day the research paper is due. I was hoping to have your exams back today, but the situation was that I went away for the weekend, and I was supposed to get in yesterday at 5, and I expected to fully complete all the exams by midnight or so, which is the time that I usually go to bed, but my flight was delayed and I ended up not getting in until 1 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, I'll do my best to have them finished by the next time we meet. Okay, in the last class, we started talking about useful plant fibers. In particular, we talked about cotton fibers, which we said were very useful, not only in the textile industry, but also in the chemical industry and in the production of many products, such as plastics, paper, explosives, and so on. Today, we'll continue talking about useful fibers, and we'll begin with a fiber that's commonly known as Manila hemp. Now, for some strange reason, many people believe that Manila hemp is a hemp plant, but Manila hemp is not really hemp. It's actually a member of the banana family. It even bears little banana-shaped fruits. The Manila part of the name makes sense because Manila hemp is produced chiefly in the Philippine Islands, and of course the capital city of the Philippines is Manila. Now, as fibers go, Manila hemp fibers are very long. They can easily be several feet in length, and they're also very strong and very flexible. They have one more characteristic that's very important, and that is that they are exceptionally resistant to salt water. And this combination of characteristics, long, strong, flexible, resistant to salt water, makes Manila hemp a great material for ropes, especially for ropes that are going to be used on ocean-going ships. In fact, by the early 1940s, even though steel cables were available, most ships in the United States Navy were not moored with steel cables. They were moored with Manila hemp ropes. Now, why was that? Well, the main reason was that steel cables degrade very, very quickly in contact with salt water. If you've ever been to San Francisco, you know that the Golden Gate Bridge is red, and it's red because of the zinc paint that goes on those stainless steel cables. But if they start at one end of the bridge and work to the other end by the time they finish, it's already time to go back and start painting the beginning of the bridge again, because the bridge was built with steel cables, and steel cables can't take the salt air unless they're treated repeatedly with the zinc-based paint. On the other hand, plant products like Manila hemp, you can drag through the ocean for weeks on end. If you want to tie your anchor to it and drop it right into the ocean, that's no problem, because plant fibers can stand up for months, even years, in direct contact with salt water. Okay, so how do you take plant fibers that individually you could break with your hands and turn them into a rope that's strong enough to moor a ship that weighs thousands of tons? Well, what you do is extract these long fibers from the Manila hemp plant, and then you take several of these fibers and group them into a bundle. By grouping the fibers, you greatly increase their breaking strength. That bundle of fibers is much stronger than any of the individual fibers that compose it. And then you take that bundle of fibers and twist it a little bit, because by twisting it, you increase its breaking strength even more. And then you take several of these little bundles and you group and twist them into bigger bundles, which you then group and twist into even bigger bundles, and so on, until eventually you end up with a very, very strong rope. I was hoping to have your exams back today, but the situation was that I went away for the weekend, and I was supposed to get in yesterday at 5, and I expected to fully complete all the exams by midnight or so, which is the time that I usually go to bed, but my flight was delayed and I ended up not getting in until 1 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, last one. Let's review the answers together. Number 1 is D, the use of Manila hemp fibers. Now, a skill I want everyone to have in all multiple choice tests, not just the TOEFL, is the skill to compare answers. See how they're similar and see how they're different. What do all of these answers have in common? They all mention Manila hemp. So if you know that Manila hemp is the main idea, but that's all you know, that's not really going to help you narrow this down. So now let's talk about what the differences are between these 4 answer choices. The first one mentions cotton fibers. The second one, choice B, mentions the various types of Manila hemp. The third one, choice C, mentions the economic importance of Manila hemp. The last one, the correct one, D, mentions the use of Manila hemp. So really, that's the choice you're making. You're choosing between cotton fibers, various types, economic importance, and the use. And that can help you narrow it down a lot quicker and with more confidence. Number 2 is a function question, and it is B, to apologize for not completing some work. You can hear this in her tone. This is a very casual way she's speaking to her students. She's explaining why she's not going to get their assignments back to them at the time that she had planned because her flight was delayed. Number 3 is B. Part of the name is inappropriate. Did you get this one right? A lot of students missed this one. The professor says it makes sense that Manila hemp is called Manila because it is chiefly produced in the Philippines, in Manila. But it is not actually hemp. So the answer is that part of the name is inappropriate. I think the reason a lot of students get this wrong is because we often think of the word inappropriate as meaning not suitable for children, like an inappropriate movie. But it also just means not suitable. So it does make sense that that is the answer. Number 4 is A, to demonstrate a disadvantage of steel cables. In the transcript, find the paragraph where she talks about the Golden Gate Bridge, and you will find tons of evidence for the disadvantage of steel cables, and that's why that's the answer. Number 5, Manila hemp is more resistant to salt water. You can also find this in the transcript, in the paragraph about the Golden Gate Bridge, and right after that. The last one, you guessed it, you can find support for this in the transcript. And I hope that you remember to choose 2 answers. It is B and D. Combine the fibers into bundles, twist bundles of fibers. So this is a detailed question, and you can find very clear support for this in the transcript in your study guide. Great work. And if you want to become a TOEFL master, I'll share everything I have with you, a full TOEFL course. All you need to do is subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment. And then I'll send you a personal link for access to everything.